The hook. Helena's medical training kicked in the moment warmth hit her face. Assess, analyze, treat. The massive stone fireplace radiated heat like a furnace, and she found herself gravitating toward it with the single-minded focus of someone whose core temperature had dropped dangerously low. Her fingers, still numb despite the leather gloves, fumbled with the zipper of her down coat. "Please, sit," the pale man said, gesturing to a high-backed chair positioned perfectly to catch the fire's warmth. "I am Constantine Dracul, yes, like the stories, though I assure you the connection is far more mundane than you might imagine." His accent carried the musical lilt of educated Romanian, each word precisely enunciated. "You are very fortunate I heard your car." Helena sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. The leather was butter-soft and worn smooth by centuries of use. "Dr. Helena Vasquez," she managed through chattering teeth. "Thank you. I thought—" She stopped herself. No need to be dramatic about how close she'd come to dying out there. "You thought you might not survive," Constantine finished gently. "A reasonable fear. December storms in these mountains have claimed many lives. May I?" He gestured toward her coat. She nodded, allowing him to help her out of the snow-crusted garment. His hands were cold, colder than hers, which seemed impossible, but his touch was gentle, almost reverent. He hung the coat on a wooden stand near the fire, where it immediately began steaming. The room slowly came into focus as sensation returned to her extremities. Heavy tapestries lined stone walls, their rich burgundies and golds catching the firelight. Shelves stretched floor to ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes that looked genuinely ancient. The air smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and something else, a faint metallic sweetness she couldn't identify. "The couple you mentioned," Helena said, her voice stronger now. "Are they all right? If they need medical attention—" "They are perfectly safe," Constantine assured her, settling into the chair opposite hers. In the firelight, his features seemed carved from marble, aristocratic cheekbones, dark hair swept back from a high forehead, eyes so deep brown they appeared black, handsome in an old-world way, though there was something indefinably unsettling about his stillness. He never seemed to blink. They required no assistance beyond shelter from the cold. Where are they now? Resting. The storm was particularly harsh tonight. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, what brings a doctor to our remote mountains in winter? Surely not tourism." Helena's hand instinctively moved to the leather satchel she'd clutched throughout her ordeal. Inside were photocopies of her grandmother's journals, pages of faded Romanian script that had taken her months to find a translator for. The story they told had compelled her to make this journey despite the season, despite the warnings about traveling alone. "Research," she said carefully. "Family history. My grandmother lived in this region during the war." Constantine's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around his eyes. Many tragic stories emerged from those years. Families scattered, histories lost. Some survived. Helena pulled the satchel closer. Her journals mention a manor house, a place where people found sanctuary. "I thought perhaps you had found it." The way he said it made her look up sharply. There was something in his tone, satisfaction, amusement, but his face revealed nothing. "The idea seems foolish now," she admitted. "Grandmother wrote about events from 70 years ago. Buildings crumble, ownership changes." "Not all things change, Doctor." Constantine rose gracefully and moved to a sideboard laden with crystal decanters. "Some endure. May I offer you something warm? Tea? Something stronger?" "Tea would be wonderful." As he prepared the tea, Helena found herself studying the room more carefully. The furniture was clearly antique, not reproduction pieces, but genuine articles that had weathered decades, perhaps centuries. Family portraits lined one wall, their subjects staring down with the severe expressions common to old formal photography. But it was the mantelpiece that caught her attention. Framed documents were arranged there like honors or awards. From her position by the fire, she could make out newspaper clippings, their edges yellowed with age. One frame held what appeared to be an obituary, the formal black border clearly visible. "Your family?" she asked, nodding toward the portraits. Constantine paused in his tea preparation. "In a sense, people I've cared for over the years." He brought her a delicate china cup, the liquid inside dark and fragrant with herbs she couldn't identify. "This will help warm you from within." Helena accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the steam. The first sip sent warmth cascading through her chest, more effective than the fire itself. "It's delicious." "What is it?" "An old recipe, passed down through generations." Constantine resumed his seat, cradling his own cup. "You mentioned your grandmother's journals. What exactly did she write about this place?" Something in his tone, too casual, too carefully neutral, triggered her physician's instincts. After 30 years of reading patients, she developed a sixth sense for when someone was hiding something important. But the tea was working its magic, and exhaustion was settling over her like a heavy blanket. Whatever questions she had could wait until morning. Outside, the wind continued its relentless howling, as if the storm itself was trying to get in. Helena's eyelids grew heavy as the herbal tea worked through her system, but her mind drifted not to sleep, but to the life she'd left behind in San Diego. 3 days ago, she'd been Dr. Helena Vasquez, respected cardiologist emeritus at Scripps Memorial, her calendar filled with the pleasant predictability of retirement, Tuesday morning mass at St. Agnes, Wednesday bridge club with the other medical widows, Thursday volunteering at the free clinic downtown. She thought of Maria, her housekeeper of 15 years, who would be discovering the note Helena had left on the kitchen counter. Gone to Romania for research. Back by Christmas. Don't worry. Such inadequate words to explain this sudden pilgrimage that even Helena couldn't fully articulate. Maria would call Father Rodriguez, who would shake his head and mutter prayers in Spanish about stubborn women who traveled alone to godless places. The routine of her San Diego existence felt suddenly foreign here in Constantine's ancient manor. Her morning ritual of checking blood pressure and reviewing her medications, the small concessions to a body that had served her faithfully through medical school, residency, 30 years of 18-hour days, and 5 years of watching Robert waste away from the same disease she'd spent her career fighting. The irony hadn't escaped her that a cardiologist's husband died of heart failure, despite every intervention modern medicine could offer. "Your work," Constantine said, as if reading her thoughts. "You must miss it." Helena started, surprised by how far her mind had wandered. The teacup trembled slightly in her hands. "I retired last year. Mostly volunteer work now. But medicine was your calling?" "Since I was 12. She smiled, remembering. "Grandmother Rosa used to tell me stories about the war, about how she helped wounded partisans in these very mountains. She said healing hands were a gift from God, that to waste them was a sin." Constantine's dark eyes seemed to sharpen. "Your grandmother was a healer?" "A midwife officially. But she delivered babies, set bones, treated infections, whatever people needed. The journals I found after she died. They described this region, this house." Helena's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "She wrote about a man who saved travelers, who gave them shelter when they had nowhere else to go." The wind rattled the windows, and Helena found herself thinking of her small house in La Jolla, where right now the December sun would be streaming through her kitchen window onto the breakfast table, where she ate the same meal every morning, 1 piece of whole grain toast, half a grapefruit, black coffee. Mrs. Chen next door would be tending her garden, probably wondering why Helena's newspaper was still on the driveway. Those people, Maria, Father Rodriguez, Mrs. Chen, the bridge club ladies, her patients at the clinic, they were her anchors now. After Robert's death, she'd discovered that a life spent healing others had left her with a web of caring relationships, but few deep ones. Her colleagues respected her patients trusted her neighbors relied on her, but who truly knew her? "Do you have family waiting for your return?" Constantine asked, again seeming to sense her thoughts. "No children. My husband died 2 years ago." The words came easier now than they once had, though the ache remained constant. "There are people who'll miss me if I don't come back, but no one whose world would shatter. The admission surprised her. She'd never voiced it so plainly before, this growing awareness that her careful, useful life had somehow become small. The clinic work was fulfilling, but it wasn't the same as the high-stakes drama of the cardiac unit. Bridge club filled the social hours, but the conversations rarely moved beyond grandchildren and health complaints. Even her faith, once a source of deep comfort, had become more routine than revelation. Perhaps that's why Grandmother Rosa's journals had affected her so profoundly. The faded pages described a woman who'd risked everything to help others, who'd found purpose in chaos, who'd encountered mysteries that challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. "This house your grandmother wrote about," Constantine said, his voice soft as velvet. "What did she say it offered to travelers?" Helena closed her eyes, reciting from memory. "In the darkest winter, when death walks the mountain paths, there stands a house where time stops. The master of this place gathers the lost, the frozen, the forgotten. He gives them peace." She opened her eyes to find Constantine watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I used to think it was metaphorical, a young woman's romantic view of wartime refuge. And now?" Before she could answer, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The teacup slipped from her fingers, and Constantine caught it with reflexes impossibly quick. His cold hands brushed hers as he steadied the china. "You need rest," he said. "Tomorrow you can tell me more about these journals." As consciousness faded, Helena's last coherent thought was of her empty house in San Diego, where no one would notice her absence for days. Helena woke to absolute silence. The absence of sound was so complete it felt unnatural. No wind rattling windows, no settling timber, no distant hum of heating systems. She lay still for a moment, trying to orient herself in the unfamiliar darkness. Her body felt strangely refreshed, despite sleeping in what she assumed was a chair by the fire. Except she wasn't in a chair. She was lying on something soft, covered by heavy fabric that smelled of lavender and age. A bed. Constantine must have moved her while she slept. Helena sat up carefully, her physician's training automatically cataloguing her physical state. No dizziness, no residual effects from hypothermia. If anything, she felt better than she had in months, more alert, more vital. The herbal tea had been remarkably restorative. Pale light filtered through tall windows, suggesting dawn or perhaps late afternoon, without her watch, which had stopped working sometime during the storm. She couldn't tell. The room was elegant, but sparse. A four-poster bed with burgundy curtains, a writing desk positioned near the windows, a wardrobe that looked like it belonged in a museum. Her clothes had been laid out on a chair, clean and dry. Her leather satchel sat on the desk, apparently untouched. Constantine's hospitality was impeccable, though the thought of him undressing her while unconscious should have been more disturbing than it was. Helena dressed quickly and moved to the windows. The view took her breath away. Snow-covered peaks stretched endlessly in all directions, the landscape pristine and impossibly beautiful. But something nagged at her about the scene, a wrongness she couldn't identify. Then it hit her. No wind. The storm that had nearly killed her was gone, but more than that, there wasn't even a breeze. The snow-laden pine branches hung perfectly still, as if frozen in time. No birds. No movement at all. The silence followed her as she opened the bedroom door and stepped into a stone corridor lined with more portraits. In daylight, if it was daylight, the faces seemed different somehow. Not severe, as she'd thought the night before, but peaceful, serene. Their eyes seemed to track her movement as she passed. She found Constantine in what appeared to be a library, seated at a massive oak table with several books spread before him. He looked up as she entered, offering the same enigmatic smile from the previous evening. "Dr. Vasquez. I trust you slept well? Better than I have in months, actually. Thank you for everything. Moving me, cleaning my clothes." She gestured around the room. "This is an incredible place. How long have you lived here?" "A very long time." Constantine closed the book he'd been reading, but not before Helena glimpsed what appeared to be handwritten text in multiple languages. "Long enough to see many travelers come and go. Speaking of travelers, I'd like to thank the couple you rescued. Are they? They're resting. The storm was particularly hard on them. Constantine rose smoothly, moving to one of the tall windows. Tell me, have you looked outside yet? Helena joined him at the window. It's beautiful. The storm seems to have passed completely. Yes, it has. There was something odd about his tone, satisfaction mixed with what might have been sadness. You're safe now. Perfectly safe. I should try to contact someone about my rental car, and I need to let people know I'm all right. Do you have a telephone? Internet? Constantine shook his head. I'm afraid we're quite isolated here. No modern conveniences. He turned from the window to face her directly. But there's no need to worry about such things. Not anymore. Something in his expression made her step back. The kindness was still there, but underneath it was something else. A certainty that felt almost predatory. What do you mean? Your grandmother's journals, Dr. Vasquez. You said she wrote about this house, about the peace it offers travelers. Constantine moved closer, his dark eyes never leaving hers. What if I told you she was more accurate than you realized? What if this place truly does offer something that the outside world cannot? Helena's medical instincts kicked in, the same sixth sense that had served her well in emergency rooms when a patient's condition was about to deteriorate. Something was very wrong here. I need to see the other couple, she said firmly. Now. Constantine studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Of course, you have a right to understand. He gestured toward another corridor. This way, Doctor. But I should prepare you. They found exactly what they were looking for. As they walked through increasingly narrow stone passages, Helena noticed more framed documents on the walls. Not family portraits, but obituaries. Dozens of them dating back decades. Names in multiple languages, ages ranging from young to old, but all sharing the same theme: found deceased, died of exposure, lost in storm. Constantine paused before an ornate wooden door. Your grandmother wrote about peace, about time stopping. She understood something that most people cannot accept. His hand rested on the door handle. Sometimes, Dr. Vasquez, the greatest mercy is to be preserved exactly as you are in your moment of greatest need. Helena's heart began to race as understanding crept in like ice water through her veins. What are you saying? I'm saying you have a choice to make. Helena's breath caught in her throat, each word hanging in the air like a blade poised to fall. The corridor suddenly felt smaller, the stone walls pressing closer, the weight of centuries bearing down on her shoulders. Her medical training screamed at her to assess the situation clinically, but terror was drowning out reason. A choice? Her voice emerged as barely a whisper. Constantine's hand remained motionless on the door handle, his dark eyes reflecting something that might have been compassion or hunger. The same choice I offered your grandmother 70 years ago. The same choice I've offered every traveler who has found their way to my door. Helena's legs threatened to buckle. She pressed her palm against the cold stone wall, fighting the wave of nausea that crashed over her. My grandmother. She left this place. She wrote about it, but she escaped. Did she? Constantine tilted his head, studying her with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Or did she simply remember it differently? Memory, Dr. Vasquez, is such a fragile thing. Sometimes the mind protects us from truths too terrible to accept. The obituaries lining the walls seemed to pulse in her peripheral vision. Names, dates, ages, an endless catalogue of the lost. Helena forced herself to focus on one frame, squinting to read the faded newspaper clipping. Margaret Walsh, age 73, found deceased after winter storm. The date was 1983, 40 years ago. That's impossible, Helena breathed. If these people died decades ago, how did I save them? Constantine finished, by offering them exactly what they needed most: peace, an end to suffering. Margaret, for instance, she was fleeing an abusive son who wanted to put her in a state facility. She chose dignity over degradation. Helena's physician instincts warred with pure terror. The logical part of her mind catalogued possibilities. Constantine was delusional, dangerous, possibly psychotic. The corridor lined with death notices suggested a serial killer's trophy collection. She should run, scream, fight, anything but stand here listening to his calm explanations of murder. But where could she run? The storm may have passed, but she was lost in the Romanian wilderness without transportation, without communication, without anyone knowing her exact location. Her rental car was buried somewhere in a ditch, and even if she could find it, the engine was dead. The nearest village was kilometers away through treacherous mountain terrain. "You're talking about murder," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Am I?" Constantine's expression remained serene. "Your grandmother wrote about peace, about time stopping. She understood that some fates are worse than death. You've seen it yourself, haven't you, Doctor? In your cardiac unit, patients clinging to machines, families prolonging agony out of misplaced love." Helena flinched. How many times had she watched families make impossible decisions? How many times had she wished for the courage to tell them that sometimes letting go was mercy? That's different. That's medicine, end-of-life care with dignity, and this is not. Constantine gestured to the obituaries. Each person here faced a choice between certain suffering and peaceful release. I simply provided an alternative to slow degradation. Helena's mind raced, searching for escape routes, for weapons, for anything that might give her an advantage. But even as panic clawed at her chest, another voice whispered in the darkness of her thoughts. What was waiting for her back in San Diego? Her empty house, her shrinking circle of acquaintances, the slow decline toward irrelevance and infirmity. The thought horrified her more than Constantine's implied threats. "The couple from last night," she said, grasping for some thread of normalcy. "You said they were resting." "They are, eternally." Constantine's smile was gentle, almost paternal. They were in their 80s, Dr. Vasquez, lost, frightened, hypothermic when I found them. The husband was showing signs of dementia, the wife exhausted from caring for him alone. They'd wandered away from a tour group, missed their bus. They were going to freeze to death slowly, in terror and confusion. Helena's knees finally gave out. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the cold stone floor. "You killed them." "I saved them." Constantine knelt beside her, his voice infinitely patient. From fear, from pain, from the slow erosion of everything they once were. They died warm, together, at peace. And you want to do the same to me. I want to offer you what your grandmother refused. Constantine's hand hovered near her shoulder but didn't quite touch. She was young then, pregnant, full of hope. She had reasons to choose the harder path. But you, Dr. Vasquez, what pulls you back to that empty life? What joy awaits you in those meaningless routines? The terrible thing was that he was right. Helena closed her eyes, seeing with perfect clarity the future stretching before her, the gradual loss of independence, the inevitable health crises, the slow fade into irrelevance. She would die anyway, probably alone, possibly in pain, but she would die as herself, not as Constantine's preserved trophy. "Show me the couple," she said, opening her eyes. "I need to see them." Constantine nodded and turned the handle. The door opened silently, revealing a room that defied everything Helena understood about death. The elderly couple sat in matching armchairs before a cheerful fire, their faces serene in the flickering light. They might have been sleeping peacefully, except for their absolute stillness. No rise and fall of breath, no subtle movements that marked the living. The woman's hand rested gently on the man's arm, both of them dressed in clean, pressed clothing that looked nothing like the hypothermia victims Constantine had described. Helena stepped across the threshold, and with that single movement, felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not just fear now, but a terrible understanding that she had entered a space beyond the natural world. The air itself felt different, thinner, charged with an energy that made her skin crawl. "How long?" she whispered. They arrived 3 days before you did, Constantine said quietly. Heinrich and Margot Brennan from Vienna, celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary with a Carpathian tour. Helena moved closer to the bodies, her medical training overriding horror. No visible wounds, no signs of violence. Their skin had a waxy pallor, but not the mottled blue-gray of typical hypothermia victims. If anything, they looked peaceful, preserved. What did you do to them? I offered them a choice. Constantine stood in the doorway, making no attempt to follow her into the room. Death in the snow, terrified and confused, or death here, together, in warmth and comfort. They chose wisely. Helena's hands shook as she reached toward Heinrich's neck, checking for a pulse she knew wouldn't be there. His skin was cool but not frozen, pliable in a way that suggested recent death, but Constantine had said 3 days. Bodies didn't remain this well preserved without embalming, and certainly not at room temperature. How are they not decomposing? This house exists outside normal time, Constantine said simply. Your grandmother wrote about that, didn't she? Time stopping. Here, decay cannot touch what I choose to preserve. Helena jerked her hand back as if burned. The rational part of her mind rejected the supernatural explanation, searching for scientific answers. Chemicals, perhaps. Some preservation method she wasn't familiar with. But deep down, in the primitive part of her brain that still believed in monsters, she knew she was looking at something impossible. You're insane, she breathed, but even as she said it, she realized it wasn't true. Constantine wasn't delusional or psychotic. He was something far worse, something that operated by rules she couldn't comprehend. Am I? Constantine's voice remained gentle, patient. Look at their faces, Doctor. Have you ever seen such peace in a hospital room? Such dignity in a nursing home? Helena wanted to argue, to rail against the wrongness of what she was seeing, but the words died in her throat, because he was right. In 40 years of medicine, she had rarely seen death this serene. Even the best hospice care, the most loving end-of-life support, couldn't erase the fundamental terror that gripped most people in their final moments. Heinrich and Margot looked like they had simply decided to rest. They chose this? She asked, her voice hollow. After I explained their options. The storm was worsening. They were lost, exhausted, hypothermic. Heinrich's dementia was advancing rapidly. Margot told me he hadn't recognized her for weeks. They faced either freezing to death in confusion and terror, or returning to Vienna where he would disappear completely into institutional care while she watched helplessly. Helena closed her eyes, remembering Robert's final months. The machines, the medications, the gradual erosion of everything that had made him who he was. How many nights had she lain awake wishing for the courage to let him go peacefully instead of fighting a battle they couldn't win? I don't believe you, she said, but her conviction was crumbling. Then stay, Constantine said softly. Stay and see for yourself what I offer. Not death, Dr. Vasquez, but transformation. Release from the prison of aging flesh, from the slow torture of decline. Helena opened her eyes and looked around the room more carefully. The fire crackled cheerfully, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with books and comfortable furniture. It could have been any wealthy person's private study, except for the 2 corpses sitting in eternal conversation by the hearth. And yet, they didn't look like corpses. They looked like people who had finally found rest. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was actually considering it. Standing in a room with 2 murdered strangers, listening to their killer's justifications, and part of her treacherous mind was weighing the options. The empty decades stretching ahead of her. The inevitable decline. The loneliness that had become her constant companion since Robert's death. Constantine was offering her an escape from all of it. I can't, she whispered, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. You can, Constantine replied. Your grandmother couldn't because she carried new life. But you, Dr. Vasquez, what anchors you to a world that no longer needs what you have to offer? Helena looked one last time at Heinrich and Margot and made her choice. Helena turned away from the corpses, her jaw set with the stubborn determination that had carried her through medical school when professors doubted her abilities, through decades of emergency rooms when colleagues questioned her decisions. "I want to read my grandmother's journals again," she said. "All of them. If she really encountered you, there might be something, some detail I missed." Constantine's expression flickered with what might have been surprise. "You think your grandmother left you instructions for escape?" "I think my grandmother was a survivor who documented everything." Helena moved toward the door, forcing herself not to look back at Heinrich and Margot. "And I think you've been alone too long to remember how stubborn the Vasquez women can be." Something shifted in Constantine's demeanor, not anger, but a sharpening of interest. "You wish to understand the rules of this place before making your decision. How very clinical of you." "It's what I am." Helena met his gaze directly. "You said I had a choice. I'm choosing to examine all available evidence before rendering a diagnosis." To her surprise, Constantine smiled, the first expression of genuine pleasure she'd seen from him. "Your grandmother said almost exactly those words." "Very well, Doctor, you shall have your investigation. But understand, once you know the complete truth about this place, about what I am and what I offer, there will be no returning to comfortable ignorance." He led her back through the stone corridors, but instead of returning to the library, he stopped at a door she hadn't noticed before. The wood was older than the rest, carved with symbols that seemed to shift in her peripheral vision. "Your belongings," Constantine said, opening the door to reveal her leather satchel sitting on an ornate desk. "Including, I believe, those precious journals." Helena rushed to the bag, relief flooding through her as she confirmed everything was still there. Her grandmother's journals, her phone, still dead, her passport. But as she pulled out the first journal, she noticed something impossible. There were more pages than before. "What did you do?" she demanded, flipping through entries she'd never seen, written in her grandmother's careful script, but describing events that extended far beyond the 3-day stay Elena had originally documented. "I did nothing," Constantine said mildly, "but this house exists in what you might call flexible time. Memories that were hidden sometimes resurface. Truths that were too dangerous to record safely become accessible when safety is no longer a concern." Helena's hands trembled as she read her grandmother's words, Day 12. "Constantine showed me the gallery today. So many travelers who found peace here. I understand now why he makes the offer. But the child, I cannot make this choice for her." 12 days, Helena whispered. "She was here for 12 days? Your grandmother was resistant to the gift I offered. She required considerable time to understand." Constantine moved to one of the tall windows, but she did understand eventually. The peace, the dignity, the escape from time's cruelties. She simply chose differently because of her circumstances. Helena flipped through more new pages, her grandmother's handwriting becoming increasingly shaky. Day 18. "He is not evil, this Constantine. That would be simpler. He genuinely believes he offers mercy. I have seen the others, and they are content. But contentment is not the same as life, and I carry life within me." "She was here for weeks," Helena breathed. "She almost stayed." "She wanted to stay," Constantine corrected gently. "Until the very end. Part of her wanted to accept what I offered. But she was young, pregnant, full of possibility. You, Dr. Vasquez, are none of those things." The words stung because they were true. But as Helena continued reading, she found something else. Detailed observations of Constantine's habits, his limitations, his vulnerabilities. Her grandmother had been documenting far more than her emotional struggle. Day 15. He cannot force the choice. Something in his nature requires consent. The others all agreed willingly, even eagerly. Without willing acceptance, his power is incomplete. Day 20. The house itself is the trap, not Constantine. He is as much prisoner as keeper. The preservation requires willing souls, and unwilling ones become something else. He fears this more than I fear death. Helena looked up to find Constantine watching her intently. She studied you, as you are doing now. His voice carried a note of admiration. Intelligence runs in your family. It makes the eventual choice more meaningful. What happens if someone refuses? Really refuses, not just hesitates? Constantine's expression darkened. That has happened only twice in 3 centuries. The results were unpleasant for all involved. Helena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the stone walls. What kind of unpleasant? The house does not release those who know its secrets, Doctor. But without willing acceptance of my gift, preservation becomes imperfect. The souls trapped here against their will become something hungry and angry. They disturb the peace of the others. You mean they become like you? Constantine's smile was sharp as winter wind. Oh no, Dr. Vasquez. They become something much worse than I am. As if summoned by his words, Helena heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of footsteps in the walls, accompanied by whispers that spoke of endless rage and hunger. Who are they? She whispered. Your other choice, Constantine said softly. Helena pressed herself against the desk as the whispers grew louder, scratching sounds accompanying them as if claws raked the inside of the walls. The temperature in the room plummeted, her breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. Make them stop, she whispered. But Constantine's attention was fixed on the walls themselves, his elegant composure cracking for the first time since she'd arrived. They know you're here, he said, moving swiftly to the door. They always know when someone new arrives. The possibility of company excites them. Company. Helena clutched her grandmother's journal against her chest. What do you mean, company? The scratching intensified, and she could swear she heard voices. Distorted, angry, pleading all at once. Words in languages she didn't recognize, then fragments of English let us out. So cold. Make it stop. Constantine's jaw tightened. Those who refused my gift but could not leave. They exist in a state between life and death, neither preserved nor truly deceased. They hunger for what they cannot have, peace, release, an end to their torment. Helena's medical mind recoiled even as her terror spiked. How many? 2, as I said. A merchant in 1847 who thought he could fight his way free. A young woman in 1923 who believed prayer alone would save her. Constantine's voice carried what might have been regret. I tried to convince them, spent weeks explaining their options, but they chose neither willing death nor acceptance of their situation. The whispers suddenly ceased, leaving behind a silence so complete that Helena could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then, slowly, a new sound emerged. Soft tapping, like fingernails against glass. She turned toward the tall window and nearly screamed. A face pressed against the glass from the outside. Gaunt, translucent, eyes black with desperate hunger. Female, young, wearing what might once have been a fashionable 1920s dress now hanging in tatters. The woman's mouth moved frantically, words Helena couldn't hear but could somehow understand. Don't let him. Choose differently. Run. Sarah, Constantine said softly. She was 19, traveling with friends who abandoned her when the weather turned dangerous. I found her half-frozen, delirious with fever. I offered her warmth, healing, peace. She spat in my face and called me a devil. The woman at the window, Sarah, pressed her palms against the glass, leaving no marks, no fog from breath she no longer drew. Her eyes locked with Helena's, and in them Helena saw something worse than death, eternal awareness of suffering without hope of relief. She's been like this for a century? Helena's voice came out as a croak. Time moves differently here, as your grandmother noted. For Sarah, it might feel like yesterday that she refused my offer, or it might feel like 10,000 years of watching the peaceful rest of those who chose wisely. A second face appeared at the window, male, bearded, wearing clothes from an earlier era. His expression was wilder than Sarah's, mouth stretched in a silent scream of rage. When he saw Helena looking, he began striking the glass with fists that made no sound, his face contorting with fury. Harkus, Constantine explained unnecessarily. The merchant. He tried to kill me, to burn down the house, to escape into the mountains. Each attempt failed, of course. This place exists by different rules than the world you know. Helena forced herself to step closer to the window, studying the two trapped souls. They looked real enough, but she could see the room behind them through their forms. Ghosts, spirits, some form of supernatural imprisonment. Her rational mind still rejected such possibilities even as the evidence pressed its faces against the glass. "Why are they showing themselves now?" she asked. "Because you represent hope," Constantine said. "If you refuse my gift as they did, you join their liminal existence. If you accept it, you achieve the peace they can never have. Either outcome torments them, the possibility of another soul sharing their suffering, or another soul escaping it while they remain trapped." Sarah's mouth was moving again, more urgently now. Helena thought she caught fragments. Grandmother, journals, don't trust. What is she trying to tell me? Lies, most likely. The trapped ones grow, creative, in their desperation. They would say anything to convince you to share their fate, rather than find peace. But Constantine's tone held a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Helena pressed her hand against the glass where Sarah's palm rested. Cold shot through her fingers, not the ordinary chill of winter air, but something deeper, the absolute absence of warmth that came with death. Yet Sarah's eyes held intelligence, memory, the spark of a person still thinking and feeling and hoping despite her impossible situation. "I want to understand how you preserve the others," Helena said, turning away from the window. "The process, the mechanism. If you can maintain bodies without decay, if you can trap souls between states, I need to understand the science." "There is no science," Constantine replied. "Only gift and curse, and the choice between them." "Then show me," Helena said, meeting his gaze with the determination that had carried her through decades of emergency medicine. "Show me how it works." Constantine's eyes glittered with something that might have been anticipation. "Very well, Doctor, but understand, what you see cannot be unseen. Some knowledge carries its own price." He led her from the room, past the frantic tapping of Sarah and Marcus at the window, deeper into the house than she had yet been. The corridors grew narrower, the stone walls older, carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own dim light. The temperature dropped with each step until Helena's breath clouded before her face. "This is the heart of the house," Constantine said, stopping before a massive wooden door bound with iron that looked medieval in its construction. Built into the mountain itself, where the boundary between worlds grows thin. He pressed his palm against the door, and it swung open silently. The chamber beyond defied architectural logic. Circular, carved entirely from living rock, it stretched both higher and wider than the house's exterior dimensions should have allowed. Dozens of alcoves lined the walls, each containing a figure in peaceful repose. Men, women, children, all perfectly preserved, all wearing expressions of serene contentment. "My collection," Constantine said softly. 3 centuries of travelers who chose peace over suffering. Helena stepped inside, her medical training warring with the impossibility before her. The bodies showed no signs of decomposition, no waxy pallor of embalming. They looked as if they had simply lain down to rest moments ago, but more disturbing than their preservation was their arrangement, positioned as if engaged in eternal conversation, reading invisible books, gazing at unseen vistas with eyes that tracked Helena's movement. "They're aware," she breathed, backing toward the door. "Of course. Awareness without suffering, that is the gift." Constantine moved between the alcoves like a curator in his private museum. Heinrich and Margot will join them soon, once they've had time to say their final farewells to the world above. Helena's clinical mind seized on details that her horror tried to suppress. No visible wounds, no signs of violence. Whatever process Constantine used, it preserved not just the body but some essence of the person within. The eyes that followed her held recognition, personality, the accumulated wisdom of completed lives. "How?" The word emerged as barely a whisper, Constantine stopped before a central alcove, larger than the rest, where a figure sat on an ornate throne. Male, ancient beyond measure, wearing robes that seemed woven from shadow itself. Unlike the others, this figure's eyes burned with an inner fire that spoke of vast and terrible intelligence. "My creator," Constantine said, and for the first time, Helena heard genuine reverence in his voice. "The one who showed me that death need not be ending, but transformation. He has been here since before this mountain had a name." The ancient figure's lips moved, no sound emerging but somehow conveying meaning directly into Helena's mind. "Welcome, child of healing. Do you see the beauty of what we offer?" Helena stumbled backward, her rational worldview crumbling entirely. This wasn't madness or delusion. This was something fundamentally beyond human understanding, operating by rules that predated civilization itself. "I can't," she gasped. But even as she spoke, part of her treacherous mind was cataloguing what she saw. No pain in these faces, no fear, no regret, no slow dissolution of everything that made them human. Just eternal rest with consciousness intact, freed from the prison of aging flesh. "You can," Constantine said, moving closer with fluid grace. "Your grandmother stood in this very chamber, saw what you see now, the peace that awaits. The dignity of choosing one's own ending, rather than surrendering to time's cruelties." Helena thought of her empty house, her purposeless days, the slow fade into irrelevance that awaited her. Then she looked again at the preserved figures, their serene faces, their eternal rest. How many nights had she lain awake dreading the morning, when her mind would begin to slip, when she would become a burden rather than a healer? The process, she heard herself ask, is it painful? Constantine's smile was gentle, understanding, like falling asleep by a warm fire after a long, difficult journey. Your grandmother wrote about watching it, how peaceful it appeared, how dignified. Nothing like the mechanical violence of your modern hospitals. The ancient figure on the throne raised one skeletal hand, and Helena felt a pull unlike anything she had ever experienced, not physical but spiritual, as if her very soul was being invited to let go of its earthly anchors. The promise of rest, of an end to struggle, of preservation beyond the reach of time's erosion. She took a step forward, then another, drawn by the possibility of peace she had never imagined possible. Then Sarah's desperate warnings echoed in her memory. "Don't trust, grandmother. Journals." Helena stopped, her hand inches from Constantine's outstretched palm. "What did my grandmother discover that made her run?" Constantine's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been fear. "What aren't you telling me about the choice?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, Constantine's face cycling through emotions Helena couldn't quite read. Behind him, the ancient figure on the throne leaned forward slightly, those burning eyes fixed on her with sudden intensity. "Your grandmother was thorough in her investigations," Constantine said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "Perhaps too thorough." Helena's hand trembled as she pulled back from his outstretched palm. "That's not an answer." She discovered certain complexities to the preservation process that I had not initially explained. Constantine's elegant composure was cracking, revealing something desperate beneath, details that might have caused unnecessary distress. The ancient figure's lips moved again, and this time Helena caught fragments of meaning that chilled her. "Tell her she has the right before choosing." "Tell me what?" Helena demanded, but Constantine stepped between her and the throne, blocking her view of his creator. "The preservation requires more than simply willing acceptance of death," he said, the words emerging as if pulled from him by force. "It requires ongoing sustenance." Helena felt the bottom drop out of her world. What kind of sustenance? The memories of the living, the warmth of recent life. Without regular renewal, the preserved ones begin to fade. Constantine's admission came in a rush, as if confession might somehow absolve him. Each new arrival strengthens the collection, maintains their awareness, preserves their peace. "You're saying they feed on new victims?" Helena's medical mind recoiled in horror, even as the implications crashed over her. Every person you save becomes part of a system that requires more death to maintain itself. Not death, preservation, dignified transition instead of meaningless decay. But Constantine's protest sounded hollow even to himself. Your grandmother understood this eventually. She saw the necessity, the kindness of the arrangement. Helena backed away from him. Her grandmother's journal clutched against her chest like a shield. The preserved figures in their alcoves no longer looked peaceful. They looked hungry. Those tracking eyes weren't serene, but calculating, measuring her potential contribution to their eternal existence. She understood, Helena said slowly. Pieces falling into place with sickening clarity, that you were building a pyramid scheme of the dead. That's why she ran. She ran because she was pregnant. Constantine's composure finally shattered completely. Because she carried life that could perpetuate itself naturally instead of requiring my intervention. You carry no such burden, Doctor. You have no future beyond slow decline and eventual suffering. The cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. No children, no spouse, no one who would truly mourn her passing. He had identified her vulnerabilities with surgical precision and was now exploiting them with the skill of centuries of practice. How many have there been? She whispered. How many travelers have you convinced to choose preservation? Constantine gestured at the alcove surrounding them. Enough to maintain the collection, enough to ensure their continued peace. Helena counted quickly. Dozens of figures, spanning what looked like centuries of fashion and culture, all willing participants in their own destruction, seduced by promises of dignity and purpose, all now dependent on fresh arrivals to maintain their preserved existence. And if I refuse, if I try to leave, then you join Sarah and Marcus in their liminal torment, and the collection begins to weaken without new sustenance. The preserved ones become restless, their peace disturbed. Constantine's voice hardened. Eventually they become like those trapped in the walls, hungry, angry, desperate for what they can no longer have. The trap was complete, had always been complete. Stay and die willingly to feed the collection. Refuse and become a tormented spirit while the collection slowly degraded into something monstrous. There was no third option, no clever escape that her grandmother had somehow missed. She was here for weeks, Helena said, understanding flooding through her. Not because she was resistant, because you needed time to weaken her, to break down her resistance, to make the choice seem inevitable. I needed time to help her understand the beauty of what I offered, Constantine corrected. But his eyes wouldn't meet hers. Helena looked again at the preserved figures, seeing them now with horrible clarity. Not peaceful souls choosing dignified ends, but the foundation stones of a structure built on systematic predation. Each new arrival bought temporary peace for the existing collection while ensuring the need for another victim. My grandmother discovered the truth, Helena said, backing toward the chamber's entrance. That's what she wrote about. Not her own reluctance, but the realization that she'd stumbled into something monstrous disguised as mercy. Constantine moved to block her path, his elegant mask finally dropping completely to reveal something ancient and desperate beneath. Where will you go, Doctor? Into the storm that brought you here? Back to your empty house and meaningless days? I offer you purpose, preservation, peace, and you choose suffering instead. But Helena was already running. Her grandmother's journal pressed against her heart, the whispers of the trapped souls rising from the walls around her, like a chorus of the damned. Behind her, Constantine's voice echoed through the stone corridors. There is no escape from this house, Dr. Vasquez. There never has been.